We'll wait for the council chamber to.
Yeah, 1 second.
I'll bring it up. Oh yeah, sure, go ahead.
Which one is that? This one? Let me see if it's...
For the presentation.
Thank you.
Paula,
Yes.
we're ready. Go ahead.
Oh, that section 8?
Okay, I will call the May 9th Glendale Housing Authority meeting at 4:20. May I have roll call, please?
Authority members: Agajanian,
Present.
Scarpetian, Kelly, Najarian, Prazian, Sinanian, Chair Devine.
Here. Next item,
The
please.
agenda for the May 9, 2017 regular meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority was posted on Friday, May 5, 2017 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. Next item.
Next item is approval of minutes.
Okay, are there any objections to the minutes?
I'll move the minutes.
Second.
Okay, without objection, the minutes are approved as stated. Or next item.
Next item is oral communication, and no cards were submitted for this portion.
Thank you. Next item.
Next item is business agenda, Director of Community Development regarding Section 8 waiting list overview. 6A1 is a motion to receive and file report.
Mr. Ochoa?
Yes, ma'am. Last week, Board Member Agajanian had raised the question as to how does the Section 8 waiting list work, and asked for some detail regarding the way information is shared and tabulated. And so we have this report kind of on tap because it comes up periodically. And so we have updated the report, and we'll have Peter Zovac come forward and give you that update and that presentation.
Thank you. And I'd like to request that after you finish this report, Mr. Zovac, you can tell us a little bit about AB 1505, the Palmer fix. So please go ahead with this report, and then we'll go into that one.
The state bill on affordable housing?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, the Assembly bill. Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the Housing Authority, as the City Manager had mentioned, we've in the past provided periodic updates about the Section 8 program. And
Sorry, you said 1305? 50. Go ahead, sorry.
Periodically, we have given updates on the Section 8 waiting list, the Section 8 program in general and the waiting list. This is something we did have the ability to come back immediately from last week's meeting and discuss again. I'm going to be giving the report. If there are any questions, that I might have to refer to Joseph Rodarte, who's the supervisor of the Section 8 program. So what we're going to be discussing today is providing a kind of a historical overview of the program. We'll be talking about the selection process that was used for the current waiting list. We'll talk about processing the waiting list and managing it, some of the safeguards that we have for the waiting list, and the current status of the waiting list. It's just in terms of background, the Glendale Housing Authority has the 4th largest housing choice voucher program in LA County. You have the County of Los Angeles operating their program, City of LA, Long Beach, and then us. And remember, not every city has a housing authority. Some of them contract, a lot of them contract out to the county for their services. The Section 8 program is a program that was developed back in the 70s. Actually, it's currently called the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Before it was known as the Section 8 program, and Section 8 was actually a regulation in the bill that authorized the program way back when in the 70s, and it just caught on as the name for the program. It is a federally funded program. It's administered by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The program is subject to their annual allocations through the federal budget process. It is not administered or funded in any way from the city. It is strictly a federal program, federal rules, with some allowances for us to be able to come up with some program design and then administering it. The City of Glendale is authorized to administer 1,592 vouchers, no more than that. We can never have 1,592 vouchers out in operation within the city. We also administer about 1,400 vouchers that come to us from other cities. They don't count against our allocation. There are actually families that have gone out or households that have gone out to other cities that have a voucher program, receive voucher assistance, and then elect, because remember the name of the program, Housing Choice, they then elect to say, I don't necessarily want to live in the city that my voucher was originated in. I do want to move to another agency. So that's called being able to port out, so portable vouchers. So we administer 1,592 of our own vouchers. We also administer about 1,400 vouchers that come from other agencies. We make payments on behalf of those agencies. We are then reimbursed by them, and we also collect a portion of the admin fees that agency earns for those vouchers.
Can I ask you, can they transfer or portable, whatever is incoming portable, they can bring from any city, or just certain cities they allow it?
Certain cities that allow it, or certain housing authorities that allow it, will allow their tenants to be able to port out. There's very extreme circumstances where you won't allow it, severe budget deficits, things like that. But typically, every agency is required to offer that option of tenants to be able to port from one agency to another. There is a requirement that that tenant, when they're issued that new voucher at that agency, they have to stay in their city for 1 year before they're allowed then to move out. But there are a number of ways in which HUD allows families and households to move out prior to that year, typically under the request of a reasonable accommodation due to disabilities. That is something that will trump the 1-year rule and allow households to move out fairly quickly.
And how many of our 1592 vouchers are currently in use?
I'll look at Joseph for that. Or I'm sorry, currently in use, I thought you were going to say how many of ours have ported out of Glendale.
No.
Which I want to say is about 8.
That's interesting too. 8.
Right, Joseph?
Those are the number of VASH vouchers that we have leased. Those are the number of VASH vouchers we have leased up. Currently, we have 3 portables outside of the city of Glendale.
So
that we're
3.
That's like an extraordinarily low number,
Oh, yeah,
right?
it's
So everyone wants to come to Glendale with vouchers, but few people want to leave Glendale.
very rarely does anyone port out of the city once they arrive.
And why is that?
I would say a highly desirable city.
There you go. I knew that. But I guess my question was, how many of our 1592 are actually in use?
There are 1525 as of the writing of this report that are being utilized.
So about a little less than 70
Correct.
are vacant or unused. And that's because
Turnover happens on a regular basis. We'll talk about that later on in the
shortage of
presentation.
funding. Is that a factor?
Shortage of funding will also come into play as well, and we'll touch on that as well.
Okay.
So prior to 1989, applications for the Section 8 program, because again, we've administered it since the late 70s here in Glendale, they were accepted over the counter. There wasn't a great demand prior to 89 for that, and it was something that was manageable at that time. To be able to receive an application, process it, probably issue a voucher fairly quickly or have a very minimal waiting list.
Why? Why was that?
The demand just wasn't there, whether or not incomes were maybe not at that particular level where people needed assistance. It's hard to say. I would say for the most part it was demand. Whether or not there were other factors, I couldn't tell you, but it was had been around for quite a while.
Okay.
For at least, by that time, the 89s, probably at least 11 years. So it had been out in the community. Okay. But again, it's just demand for the most part.
I have a question. So I know people that they got the portable vouchers from another city, let's say from Pasadena. I know the people. But at the same time, they did apply with Glendale. So when they got the vouchers, portable vouchers from Pasadena, are they removed from the Glendale waiting list?
No, they are not.
They are not.
Because someone could argue that I applied at Glendale. I've been issued something from Pasadena. I don't maybe necessarily like Pasadena's system and the way that it's run. In the future, if Pasadena were to have a funding issue and somehow maybe terminate portable programs, I don't want to lose my place in line on the Glendale waiting list. So HUD doesn't really allow you to necessarily remove somebody from your own waiting list when they've received assistance at another agency.
Isn't it also in our interest to keep them on our waiting list, in the sense that with portables we're being compensated incompletely for
Yeah, at some
administering
point,
the voucher?
and I'm sure it's happened, Mr. Rodarte can chime in on this, but I'm sure it's happened where we finally have pulled someone off a list who happened to be a port
Right.
who had come back to our city, and then we would approach them and say, you now have the ability to become an official Glendale voucher holder, and they can do that, and then
Then we get the extra 10%.
extra
or
20% on the
11%.
admin fee reserve. or
Which adds
admin
up,
fee
right?
collection.
After a while, those add up to 20%.
It could. But I couldn't tell you how many times that has happened, that we've pulled someone off the list who happened to be a voucher holder living in our area as well.
I'm just saying, we still administer the portable vouchers, and there are, what,
Oh, it still
how many
works.
thousands, right? There's 1,300, 1,400 of
Almost
them?
1,400.
Yeah, and those we're not fully compensated on from
Correct.
from
And
HUD.
it's virtually the same amount of work as if we have pulled someone off the waiting list. Basically, someone's pulled someone off the waiting list for us. They still have to come to us and qualify as if we had pulled them ourselves. Even if they've been qualified at the other agency, they still come to us and we qualify them and screen them per our criteria. So sometimes they come and say, well, I've already done this with my agency. Well, yeah, but now you're porting into Glendale and we're required to do this again. So they were accepted over the counter. Then sometime in 1989, it was determined that we needed to open up the waiting list, do a little more formal process. There were a desire to provide a preference point in 89, and that preference point was just 1 point, and it was for being a resident of Glendale. And at that time, the decision was made to make it applications available on a first-come, first-served basis. And although with the recent retirements, we don't have any staff around from that time, that era, we've heard the stories of what had happened. The applications were made available at 3 public parks, if I'm not mistaken, 2 days only, required mounted police, chain link fencing was involved, CNN also came out. So it was an experience from what we understand.
And a question, and we don't have anybody from that those years
No.
in the new waiting list?
No.
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 Okay.
We would have exhausted the previous list
Okay.
before we got into the new list. So I want to say there was about 6,000 households that applied at that waiting list, and it lasted for us until about 1999. And that was the time that we had decided that we had about 100 applicants left. Let's open enrollment again and start a new wait list process. And that process was started, the discussion with the Housing Authority in 99, the actual opening of that list occurred in 2001. So there was a lot of work involved. It's not easy to open up a waiting list. And given the scene, the chaotic scene that we had in 89, everyone wanted to make sure it was done in a controlled manner. And waiting list opening has really evolved. A lot of agencies now, when they do it, are all putting their own spin to it. Right now, a lot of it is electronic submittals only, no paper applications. It's just too hard to process that many applications. Some agencies are opening it up for a minimum of 1 day only, some for a week, and that's it. Preference points vary from agency to agency. So we decided to open up in 2001. We started looking at it and started developing a plan for it, though, back in 99. And so in 99, what the Housing Authority wanted to do is, avoiding the 89 incident, is establish preference points that serve the greatest community needs, provided some clear delineation of the levels of need between families and households, and provide a fair and reasonable system of waitlist management. In terms of preference points, these are the preference points that were adopted and still in play for this current waiting list, the remaining people. The Housing Authority.
I'm sorry, I have a question. So Glendale came up with this, go to that preference list.
Yes.
Did we do it, or the HUD asked you to do it, or
No, the Glendale Housing Authority
did it?
was able to provided these preference points and assigned them to the program.
Okay.
So there's kind of a menu of types of preference points that are HUD allowable, and then the Housing Authority went through the process and said, these are the ones that we think are important for our community in order to serve the households in a fair and equitable manner. So as you say, displaced by government action, that was awarded 12 points. Homeless or living
What
in
is
homeless
that?
shelters,
How does one get displaced by
eminent domain,
Okay.
up until recently. Excuse me? Correct.
Oh.
So examples of the city coming in and for a development project, removing units, both on the commercial side as well as on the housing side. We've had demolition of units.
But
displaced
those people are not added to the list, right? Like today, if something happens, somebody is
the
victim
waiting list
of...
is closed. The waiting
So
list is
that's-
closed. So
okay.
these points, these preference
Right.
points only apply to the people that are on the list.
Okay.
So someone can't come to us and say, hey, I've just been recently displaced. I'm not on your waiting list. I'd like to be on there now. We'd say, no, it's only subject, these points are subject to those that are on the wait list.
And Peter, can I ask again, I'm sorry, when was this list activate or come? when did it come?
2001.
2001. Do you think it's time that we update it, or can we update this?
It's not suggested to update it. We still
No?
have close to 2,500 people still on the waiting list. So I don't think anyone would appreciate changing the rules in midstream, especially for those people that have waited so long and are starting to see daylight and then have the rules changed again. So it's always recommended to complete your list before going through the next process of establishing a new one.
I was discussing it with my colleague, I'm really afraid to even raise this issue, because
Then-
I know,
I can just continue.
No. How about you raise the issue?
Because
let me raise it.
I'm afraid to answer.
So the question was, can someone's name be added to the list? No. However, someone who's on the list currently with let's say 2 points, claims that her husband has beaten her, files a police report,
Or his wife.
or the wife has beaten the husband, or
husband.
whatever, bing, they're the next one in line for a Section 8.
Yeah, you shouldn't have asked that question.
I shouldn't have asked that. Don't say that. Don't put that on TV,
Yeah,
Mr. Agajanian, because
Domestic violence.
this is going to blow the system.
Yeah, we don't, and we certainly we're not making light of the situation
No.
you're describing, but we also don't want to provide a roadmap for people to try and circumvent something that's out there either. The homeless preference point and the domestic violence preference point is something that staff takes very seriously and holds to a high threshold level of applicants to document that process. And if you want to hear more about it, Mr. Rodarte can provide that detail, because he's the one that will be looking at and screening applicants that make claiming this particular point. He's the one that looks at that and works with not just himself, but other agencies outside of the city to help document the homeless and or DV points. And I don't know if you necessarily want to do that. It's something we can provide you later on in a follow-up, but it is something that
Maybe
requires
privately,
more than
I can meet
accusations.
with
It
him
requires
to-
documentation.
To examine the rigor in which these claims are being verified.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I said I would like to meet with Mr. Rodarte privately so he can explain to me the extent in which claims, like we have on the board, I won't even say it anymore, are verified and accepted as valid.
True.
Right.
But let me just reiterate, it is a very high threshold to make and claim that point, and we want to make sure that it's not something that's abused. And we like to think that, based upon our experience, that we have been making the right decisions on those claiming those points.
And these don't happen too often, right?
No, they don't.
Very infrequently.
Well, you know what? Certainly in that second instance, no. In terms of homeless or potential to be homeless, we hear about that.
Yeah,
we hear
sure.
that.
Sure.
Also, there's another 12-point preference point for victims of hate crime, retaliation, or witness relocation. We've had a few of those in the program. Then we have U.S. veterans at 6 points. And then we have a category of 1-point preference points. And these are the ones that we're really, for the most part, are dealing with now and are down to on our wait list. They are 1 point each for extremely low-income household, elderly single persons over age 62. So that's the single elderly is our short way of calling it. Households with disabled household members, residents who live or work in Glendale, and then working families or unable to work due to age or disability. And that second portion is really a HUD requirement that kind of covers for those people that aren't able to work.
So, if I may interrupt, how can we have, how many are we have? Several hundred with 5 points. If to have that fifth point, you would either have to be an elderly single or a member of a household or part of a family. So how, aren't those exclusive?
No, they're not.
So if grandpa lives with you, he's the elderly single?
No, you wouldn't. No. It would
How would
be
that
right
work?
now. It would be a single person over the age of 62. So a single senior
Okay.
Who's disabled?
who is extremely low income,
Okay.
who is disabled,
Okay.
who lives in Glendale,
Okay.
and is unable to work to their disability. 5 points.
Oh, but it says families, they're working families, or unable to work. Okay, so that would be the fifth. Okay, got it.
All right. So obviously the preference points then are then totaled, and it's based upon the information provided on the application for the wait list management. Once, and I need to let you know that is that once someone is pulled from the application, from the wait list, we then verify that those points are accurate. We don't do it when someone comes in and says, I want to update my application. So we take them for their word about that. But when they are eventually pulled from the program, from the wait list, we then at that time verify all those points to make sure that it's correct.
I mean, if you have 50 people that all have 5 points, their situation is the same. How do you choose who would get the next voucher?
And we'll go through that.
Coming up.
Yep. How did we? So there were about 12,553 valid applications that were received during that 2-week. Is it a 2-week open enrollment, Joseph? The 2-week open enrollment back in 2001. 12,500 applications. So we had a consultant that was hired to handle the intake, data processing, data entry, and quality control. Internal audit was tasked with coming and reviewing and overseeing the process to make sure everything was on the up, and it was. As I mentioned, it was a 2-week enrollment, January 2001. Applications were paper applications at that time. They were just distributed via local newspapers, community centers, GTV6, and an 800 number in which applications were mailed out.
Sorry, I informed the public. That's why lots of people came forward at the time.
Yes.
In 2001?
Yeah, so that was in 2001. If we were to do this again, it would certainly, for a 2-week period of time, double.
We don't have that many viewers.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that what you're talking about?
Maybe a couple hundred.
No. For that purpose,
That's
they would
before you
call
were
each
number
other.
2 most influential.
I got it now. Okay. All right. So people were then, once applications were inputted, people were then placed on the waiting list. So first and foremost, we assigned each application a random number, just so that we can reference it. Because at that time we were concerned, or the agency was concerned about the announcing of names. So we were announcing application numbers. So that was just randomly assigned numbers that would be used in place of names. And then each application was assigned to the wait list by a 2-step computerized sorting process. So they were assigned a random lottery selection order number, and then they were assigned their preference points and then placed in buckets, what we call buckets, per their preference points. So in the old style lotteries, we had the big drum pulling tickets out. Someone got pulled number 1. Someone got pulled the second one. Third card was pulled. Rather than do that, a computer program randomly assigned numbers. Someone was assigned number 1, number 2, number 3, all the way to 12,553. So here's kind of an example of what that looked like back then. So, and these are all made-up names here. So the identification number for application number one, the first application, ID number 784, that's what we reference them as. They were assigned a lottery selection order number of number 1, their name, and they claimed 5 preference points. Then the computers picked Mr. Brown, signed him number 2, and he claimed 6 points, and then so on. So that's how the first stage of the lottery in 2001 went. It's assigning this process. What it then did was, and this pointer doesn't work when you have a...
I know that's me.
So what we then had to do is once we had the lottery selection order completed, we then needed to sort everybody by the number of preference points that they claimed, going from highest to lowest. So the computer program then did that, and bam, this is the change that you had. If you recall, Mr. Joe, who was selected 5th randomly in selection order, had 47 points claiming. Ms. Wilson had 47 points, assigned selection order number 10. The computer then reorganized everybody per their preference points, highest to lowest. Mr. Joe, 47, Ms. Wilson, 47. Here's a tie here. Same amount. What's the tiebreaker? Their lottery selection order number.
Right.
They were selected 5th. Ms. Wilson was 10. And you'll see that with all of these preference points, you'll see that these numbers get larger as you go on. So in a nutshell, that's how the preference points were assigned, and that's how they're managed. They're managed in these buckets. Fortunately, after this period of time, we're down here managing and looking at applicants who are claiming the 5 points. Although occasionally there are people that have circumstances where they might be homeless on our waiting list, and they're able to come in and claim the homeless point, and then having 17, adding 12. So any questions about how this was done? If not, okay. Because we'll and let me just remind you that what this is called, going from this and then rearranging per preference point and then lottery selection order, this is what we call sorting the applications. And we do this not just at that time that the lottery was conducted. We do this on a continual basis for the program, and we'll explain why.
Mr. Zobak, if we decided as a policy determination to award a point to individuals over 80, does this housing authority have the ability to do that at this time in the process?
It's kind of similar to the earlier question: is can different preferences be created?
Yeah.
I'm hesitant to say HUD would say no, but I think both HUD and staff would say that is not a very good idea to do that, to change the rules midway through. And this is even more than midway. So these last remaining people, the standard is that you complete your waiting list per the rules that you establish for that waiting list before you do anything and propose any changes.
Because we're all faced with the stories of, the senior 80 years and above. I've been on the waiting list 16 years. I'm going to die in the next few years.
And I don't even know if that's even an allowable preference point for HUD.
Right. Okay.
Selecting a random age number, as opposed to just saying senior, 62, which is an accepted standard.
Thank you.
So waitlist activities. Each applicant is required to report changes to us, and those changes can be their income, and more importantly, if they move, change of their address to let us know so we can send them, when we send them information, it's accurate. And all these changes could impact their number of preference points and where they might stand on a list. Back in 2011, 2012, some of you might recall that we came before the Housing Authority and we talked about the fact that it had been a while since we had been able to go through a systematic way of contacting everybody on the waiting list and asking them, are you still out there? Are you still interested in the Glendale program? Please contact us. Prior to that, what we were doing is we were trying to contact our people on the waiting list in batches. Maybe once a month, 25 letters will go out. Are you still out there? Any changes? Let us know. Then the next month or 2 months, another 25 letters, very slowly, incrementally. Well, we came before the Housing Authority and we talked about this dilemma, and we had hired some extra staff, and we went through the applications at that time on the list. It was about 5,500, if I recall correctly. And we sent a mass mailing out to everybody, asking them, what is your status? Where are you? Are you still interested? And so that's called purging the waiting list. And just that update, that systematic update of everyone on the list at that time, resulted in approximately 3,000 applications being deemed inactive from the waiting list. So, and that's an important thing to note, is that we don't necessarily remove someone from the waiting list and or destroy their applications. They're simply moved from active to inactive. We always want to be able to trace our steps back in the computer system to a particular file, to a household. So we were able to reduce the waiting list by about 3,000 people, sending out that large systematic. And it took, I think, a year, did it not, Joseph?
It would be approximately 7 months.
7 months to be able to complete that. And then months of follow-up information, people that did indeed move, that never responded to our outreach, who we then made inactive on the waiting list. Might have come back from a year later and said, what happened? I haven't heard from you. Well, we sent you this letter. Here's a copy of it. Oh, I moved from that address. I forgot to tell you. And then we would activate that application again. So we were very lenient on those that, for valid reasons, weren't able to respond to us because of something like they moved and forgot to tell us. So as I said before, the applicants' preference points are verified at the time that an application is pulled from the wait list. Applicants move towards the next step of voucher issuance, which is they'll meet with a staff member who helps them assemble their paperwork, tells them what's needed, then it's assigned to an advisor, housing advisor, who will then go through the paperwork, verify the preference points, work with the applicant on qualifying them, and then moving them to the next step of issuing a voucher, hopefully. And then again, all applicants are subject to HUD screening and eligibility policies, and that's where it takes place at this point in time. Criminal background screening, that's the time that we do them, for example. There are others.
Credit ratings or bankruptcy?
We do look at credit, not necessarily in terms of poor or bad credit per se, just for inconsistencies with regards to income. So I think someone mentioned or questioned earlier, is there turnover in the program? There is. It can average anywhere from 6 to 10 vouchers per month in turnover. Those are people that have maybe graduated from the program, no longer need the assistance. The formula spits out that once you plug in their income, the rent structure, all that, our subsidy is zero. So what happens is that applicants, when that first happens, that someone's subsidy is zero, they're given 6 months. 6 months in order to absorb any changes that might happen. So a new job that has now made my assistance zero. You have a 6 months of grace period for a change to happen that may or may not require you to come back onto the program per HUD's rules. So it's kind of a safe harbor for applicants. And it's mandated. So we have people that graduate from the program. We have tenants that are terminated from the program. And unfortunately, we have tenants who are on the program that pass away. And the voucher then resorts back to the housing authority.
No, the recipients passing away does not necessarily result in termination of the voucher, right? Or termination of that program, because sometimes with their family member or relative is...
Well, I would say the single household voucher member who passes away from that voucher, there's no one else in the approved household
right.
To benefit from it, so it comes that case where it comes back. So in a program, though, where you have predominantly a senior program, and one of the preference points is single senior, mm-hmm. That tends to happen.
And the ones that are not single are probably portables? Is that, I mean...
No, they're just others that, yes, are probably portables.
And those sometimes do not result in termination of the program?
Correct. So a surviving spouse who is legally part of the household member would then have that voucher.
Even if he's very young?
Well, they have to be an adult.
No, I'm saying
to be able
like
to inherit the program.
Person maybe is like 35 years old.
They might be 35, but if the income qualifies being extremely low income and meet the other criteria to now become the new head of household member, that could be done, yes. There are currently 2,248 applicants on the waiting list, and we want to just make a point to, we caught a typo on Friday on the staff report, and we made a change to it, but unfortunately the older version got out to you, so I'll let you know. 2,248 applicants on the waiting list. One person is claiming 16 points. There are 67 households claiming 5 points, 826 households 4 points, 719 households 3 points, and this is where your paper shows 732, your staff report. It's 432 are claiming 2 points, 199 are 1 point, and there are 4 households out there that have no points.
And the 16-pointer is a homeless person?
It would be a combination of 12 points, most likely for homeless, and then some of the other 1 point categories being assigned to it.
So if you can go back for a second. In theory, with a 6 to 10 person turnover per month, all the 5 points, all those individuals currently on the 5 point, in the 5 point group should go through the process within the next 12 months. Of course,
I wouldn't say that.
Of course, because that list may vacillate, right? Because that list may increase.
Correct. That list may increase, and our budget will likely decrease. So if anyone were to ask, how long would it take for me, 67 5-pointers? We do not know.
Your budget.
Certainly, you're in a better position than 4, 3, 2, and 1-pointers. But when we can pull you, when you might be pulled.
In the absence of your budget decreasing, if, let's say, things were to remain as they were in 2016-17 fiscal year, you would go through 67 people in a 12-month period.
It's possible, assuming that we're fully staffed, we're able to process.
I'm just
those
basing that
applications.
on the fact that you said we have
Correct.
average of 6 to 10 months.
Correct. I just want to note that there are anomalies that happen in a program year.
Exactly. I understand. I'm just saying, in theory, if all things were to hold true, the 6 to 10 person per month turnover would cover 67.
Could be possible, yes. Yes.
But the problem is that if you're having 6 to 10 vouchers, so to exhaust this list will take another 6 years. And they waited already 16 years.
Correct.
So it will be 40 years for the last one to get the...
Well, I would say that we've gone through 10,000 applicants in 16 years, so it's about 800 a year. But a lot of those years were good years in terms of funding from HUD, in which we were able to issue vouchers quickly on a regular basis. Yeah. Lately, I bet you if you were to look at the first few years, number was high, subsequent years, lower.
And yes, I mean, that's exactly right. People would stick around for another 25 years.
And they waited
So
already.
all the rhetoric during the elections about nothing's being done and certain people can do better and that, somehow the system, the city or the city council members that were serving previously were failing the system. I'm hoping you're discovering that it's quite far from reality. Sorry, had to say it.
This might be the appropriate time for an apology, but
what?
we'll discuss that later. No, I understood your frustration. During the process, there was a feeling, and people would call us and say that there's a candidate who's running and promising Section 8 increase.
If you have a videotape of it, bring it to me. You can just... Did you see it yourself?
Oh.
I mean, you can't throw this on TV when it's
Just saying in
baseless.
general terms. I didn't say it was Mr.
I never said
Agajanian. I said a
anything which is
candidate.
not true.
Okay, gentlemen,
Is it a candidate?
let's let Mr. Zovac continue.
Yeah,
And
but
as a
wait,
matter
wait.
of fact, Mr. Zovac, can you, since we've been chatting about, you've been discussing the budget and the vouchers, can you tell us what just happened this past week with the budget from HUD and the rescinding of vouchers?
Yes, I could.
But he'll do it quickly.
Yes. So up until last week, we were remember the city's fiscal year and HUD's federal year are different years. So I'm talking about the federal fiscal year of 2017. Up until recently, we were operating under a continuing resolution. So last week, both members of the houses have passed a budget. That is being studied and implemented now, and it will be in effect until the end of October, in which they've approved a HUD budget. They say that they've increased the funding for Section 8 by about $660 million is the number that we're seeing. which is all good news, considering that the 2018 budget that's being proposed out there and discussed and will now be debated more thoroughly talks about cuts, very serious cuts to the HUD program. But unfortunately, when the federal government is looking at approving budgets, they're looking at older numbers. So they try to project agencies' usage based upon numbers from 6 months ago. Every month, the per unit costs go up. And then, so if you're dealing with old factors into the formula, the new formula is saying, well, we've got you $660 million more, doesn't necessarily mean you're pulling more people off the waiting list. In fact, with the passage of time, we've recently received word from HUD that to expect a decrease in funding, and they're prorating our money to about 97%. They say, based upon their calculations, they estimate us to be in the red by about $200,000 based on our current standing. And they issued some directives that they wanted us to follow to try and erase that deficit between now and the end of the year. One was looking at our payment standards, looking at some other factors that come into play, all of which we can't really address because we're compliant with those. The other comment that they made was they asked us to rescind all vouchers that have been issued to people who are out there looking. Right now. And we do have some of those. We have 4 that are out there. And so we received that notice earlier in the week, and we contacted HUD, and we proposed some strategy to them. And it seems like we got a reprieve on that for a little bit. Not very much, but for a few days, while we hope those 4 applicants are out there trying to find that unit and contract up before HUD really says, this is it, stop.
I wanted to ask you about that. Thank you. I know you're getting a good result from that, we hope. But so that people realize that the lengths that you're going and your staff are going to assure that those that have these vouchers are able to use them, so that the system is working and you are working diligently to make that happen.
We're trying. Thank you.
Go
we'll
ahead.
Pass that on.
Thank you.
So since 2014, we pulled about 230 applicants off the waiting list. More so, those were in the latter stages of 2014, 15, and 16. And they've all been processed. Some have leased up. Some didn't qualify. Some didn't have the points they assigned, they claimed that they had, and were put back on the waiting list. And then real quickly, because I know in the interest of time, let's see.
Can we talk about fraud?
We can.
Yeah, because that was another issue that I've personally heard talked about during the campaign over and over, even post-campaign too. So what is this fraud thing? I mean, let's visit that issue.
Well, so when you hear fraud, we hear 2 types of fraud. There are fraud being committed by households possibly on the program, households possibly on the waiting list to be able to get onto the program, or the accusations we have heard is there's fraud within the housing staff.
I think that's the fraud that was...
That's the one we want to talk about?
That's the one that's being exploited during political processes.
Okay, so let's at least clear the air about the first 2. When there are accusations of fraud by program participants, and we have a fraud hotline, we have an investigator that looks at these things, we take them seriously, we investigate. If you Google our Section 8 program, you'll see cases that the DA have taken for applicants that have been convicted of fraud for the Section 8 program. So we take that seriously. We do the same with any allegations of fraud with regards to an applicant on the waiting list, and we do that through the vetting process I described when we review their applications and verify their preference points. So the third thing we have heard in operations of the program, and no one has been able to prove anything or even provide a name, and I think that's important because it gets thrown out there, and then when they get called on that, saying, really, in confidence, tell me who. Well, I don't want to get involved. I don't want to say. Well, then how can you make an accusation like that, and how can we follow up at that and people then back off that? But it's very easy, I think, for someone who might be disgruntled to say, well, I think there's fraud within the program. So we have 22 employees that actively administer the Section 8 program. They range from customer service staff at our counter to as high as Mr. Rodarte oversees everything.
If I can interrupt you for 1 second, about a decade ago, there was an instance of an individual unconnected to the city of Glendale who represented herself
Yeah.
as having the ability to secure Section 8 vouchers for a price. And I believe a large number of people engaged in that fraudulent transaction by giving her money in the hopes of receiving a voucher. And I think she gave them like paper, something she printed out on her own home printer saying, here, you got the voucher, you're about to receive the apartment. And from what I understand, in the end, of course, she got caught and she was convicted. Obviously, there was absolutely no connection to Glendale Section 8 program. And as anecdotal evidence, folks still talk about that. And when you point out the fact, well, you realize that was
a scam.
That was a scam. They're like, yeah. But and you point out, well, how do you connect that to the city? You never receive an answer. Is that all true? What I just said is that the case?
Correct. I had forgotten about that case, and there have been some others now that.
But similar,
thinking
right?
Back, very similar.
Again, unconnected to
someone opening up a business, saying, "Come in, pay me $50. I'll help get you on a waiting list," and it's something manufactured over the internet that people might believe. And when we've received those, and we had PD investigate that one complaint that you brought up. We finally had someone that was willing to go to the police and report it as a victim. And police, if I'm not mistaken, found that person. And then restitution did go back to that person who pressed the claim voluntarily because police are somewhat limited in what they can do. And then the next person who didn't want to be involved and didn't want to go to the police then said, I heard someone got reimbursed. Well, yeah, you'll have to go back to the police and talk to them about this. So, yeah, there are cases like that. But, again, I go back and say that we've not been able to prove anything that has existed, any of the accusations against housing staff. And so why is that? Well, we have a software system separate from the rest of the city system called Elite that administers all the functions that we've talked about. We have internal auditing that is done. It's done through reports that the system generates for us, and it's done by staff auditing. Applications are always under lock and key. We talked about the fact that there are times where we will update applications, and after a sufficient time of updating applications, we might sort the lottery orders at that point in time. Prior to doing that, what we do is we'll audit, and that's a function, that's my function right there actually, is that I review monthly updates that are made to the waiting list as it relates to people that are changing their preference points. So a staff person, we sit down, we go through, the computer generates and says 20 households adjusted their preference points in April. So we'll have those 20 files. We'll go through, I physically go through each file. I look for the applicant's wait list update that they've filled out. I count the number of preference points that they claim. I double check what staff has generated. I check the entry that's made into the software system. And then I also cross-check their ID numbers, that they're identical. I check the letter that they were sent, because once someone updates and we recalculate it, we send them a letter saying you got 5 points. I check to make sure the letter has 5 points on there and the 5 points are described. It's the right points being described. So there's a system that is in place and other functions that are audited. And that's where they're administered on 3 levels. At the admin level, the advisor level I'd mentioned earlier, once they get a new case, they verify that the preference points are all there, and at the supervisory level, with Mr. Rodarte and I forgot to mention Ms. Bockenkamp, also on the administering the Section 8 program. The housing advisors are randomly assigned cases. They don't get to select which household they want to serve. We have other people that have made accusations. Well, the advisor is helping someone get away with fraud, not calculating all their income. Well, the cases are assigned and rotated. So that ability to have a file and have that be your household file that you deal with forever is very limited because we do rotate. And it's healthy to have files rotate because some advisors are specialized in catching certain things, others look at other elements, and so you start to see that as a file rotates between different advisors over the years, everyone's looking at something differently, and everyone can catch something. We talked about portables. No person can influence placement on the waiting list. There's the fraud hotline number, 548-6442. The program challenges right now is, as we had said, the instability of federal revenue streams. Our rents are rapidly rising. So earlier in the years, HUD would say you have 1,592 vouchers. Depending upon your per unit costs, we'll give you $16 million as an example for your 1,592. And those were in the good times where HUD would give you the money you actually need. Then they were just giving you the money that was approved at the federal level and then saying, make do with it. So even though you're authorized for 1,592, your $14 million may only be able to assist 1,450 vouchers. So the remaining go unused. And any time there's an action at the federal level, it creates an even greater reaction at the local level. So it takes time to take corrective action when you want to implement some changes that might try to address budget shortfalls. It's like turning the ship a little bit.
So I just want to, your last statement, so the HUD allocation goes down, which means what we are able to give those 1,200 and some people that are holding the vouchers less money, and yet the rents are going up.
No, because you still need to be able to pay your landlords a certain level of rent to make your existing applicants on the program competitive for the units that are out there. But it's a very difficult balancing act. We could give everybody a payment standard for a one-bedroom at $1,900, and no one will have trouble right now finding a one-bedroom unit. But what that does is that it limits, it reduces your budget, and instead of being able to assist 1,500 people, you're only assisting 1,200 people. So it's a very difficult balancing act as to how much do you give to make the existing group competitive versus how much is your budget versus how much is your turnover versus what kind of staffing challenges are you having versus what is HUD telling us one day and then changing the next day. When we do, fortunately, when we have had budget reductions, the worst situation is that you start terminating people from your program. We've not had to do that. We've been able to manage our reductions in budget from the federal government through attrition. Simply, as a voucher comes back to us, someone's graduated from the program, we don't pull anyone off the waiting list. The voucher just sits there unused. We try in the past to reduce our HAP costs via payment standards, but in this competitive market, actually what we're doing, and we've made mention to you at the annual report, we had to increase it twice in the last year to make our clients competitive. And then again, the last resort is terminating existing or active vouchers. And that's it. I'm sorry it went long, but I think there were some good questions. So,
I have a question.
I do know there's an AB 1505.
We'll do that another time. We'll agendize that. Mr. Agajanian.
So anybody can come to your department and ask where they stand on the list?
You know, they could, and they do. But what's difficult is that when we sort applications, we try. There's really one time that a sort is mandatory. We'll update applications all day long and your preference points. But we won't reorder them until we know we're going to be pulling people off the waiting list. So when someone comes in and says, I want to know where I am on the waiting list, we'll say, you know, the number we give you is not going to be an accurate number. Well, why is it? Why not? Well, because other people are changing their preference points. And the number we give you is before we have the computer program sort everybody into a new round of buckets. So you come in and ask for a status number. That status number today might be your number 20 on the list. Tomorrow it might be number 40 if we happen to go through a sort. Then you'll come in tomorrow and say, well, how could I go from 20 to 40? Something is wrong here. So we let them know that it's very difficult to give out what your status order number is on the waiting list because of all these changes. We don't want to input one application out of 2,400 and then tell the computer to resort everybody, because we want to be able to keep it to a minimum so that it's like winding something up. You don't want to wind it too many times, because if you have to go back and unwind it, it's a little more difficult, even though it's a computer system. But there are some people that are just adamant, and we'll say, okay, the front counter staff and a majority of the staff have no ability to manipulate the computer system for the housing program. Only one person can conduct a sort. and that person conducts a sort when Mr. Rodarte tells them to. So then if someone says, I want to know right now what my status is, the clerk at the counter will say, I cannot give you that. You would have to speak to Mr. Rodarte, who tries to explain the same information to them again. But if they're adamant, we can do that, but it may not be at the time that they would want it done. The next time we might do a sort, we might be able to get back to them and let them know. It's just difficult to be able to do, and it causes more confusion than the benefits are.
So this also confuses the public too.
It can, yes.
So then it makes it difficult for them to.
In the case of today, I walk away from the counter, I'm 20. I come back next week, and all of a sudden I'm number 40. How did that happen? Well, 19 other people, 20 other people came in after you.
Which then also contributes to the notion that there's something going on, that there's some kind of
Right.
untoward conduct because I moved that far. And it is complex. And truly it is. But, I mean, that's just the nature of this particular program.
And I forgot to mention is that the accusation where someone says, I just have a family next door to me, they just moved into Glendale, they got issued a Glendale voucher. How do you say that no one is being issued vouchers right now? We've heard that as well, especially when we were taking no one off the waiting list, and it was well known that we weren't pulling people from the waiting list. So somehow someone got a voucher from us. There are portables. They came in from other agencies, is what we were finding. There was no fraud.
Thank you.
One question.
Councilman,
Yeah,
go ahead, Garpetti, Mayor.
If I'm on the list and I receive a letter that I'm being pulled and and I'm going to receive the voucher, and somehow I'm in a hospital or I miss my mail, is there a cooling period or a grace period from the date that it's written on that application or on that letter? Let's say it's like May 10th, whatever, and then I found out on May 18th that I received the letter. Is there a grace period between the date that it's written on the application or the letter?
There's not a set grace period in our policies. So what we'll do is if we send out a letter to somebody saying, congratulations, we are pulling you from the list, now you go through the process of coming in and trying to qualify for the program, that letter comes back undeliverable, we'll go back to the file and say, is there a phone number on the application anywhere that we can call?
No, if the address is correct and I missed my mail and I didn't see the letter, I saw it a week later or 10 days later. Can I come back?
One day drop, we ask you to please contact us by May 10th and you don't contact us till the 11th? No, we have a grace
No, not
period.
one day, a week.
Even a
That's
week.
what I'm saying. What is that period that from the date of that application or the grace period that I can come
We
back
make
and say?
multiple attempts to have people come in. After waiting 16 years to be called from the program, we try not to hold somebody to a calendar deadline date that we just impose and want to enforce for the heck of it. We understand that people have been waiting a long time, that there are probably reasons why they might have missed a deadline by a day. Certainly missing it by 4 months, and we've tried every way to try to contact you. We've done a utility search, try and find where you're living in maybe in an existing unit. We've looked at your app. We've called the phone numbers of record, no contact. At that point, we've done everything we can.
Sure. Got it. Thank you. Fair enough.
Thank you. Councilmember Sinanian.
So you just mentioned the unfortunate date of May 10th, which I think you gave just as an example, but just very recently, from what I understand, the federal government HUD told you to do something, right, with respect to that date? Outstanding vouchers, cutoff date.
Well, no. They've actually asked us to, as of May 2nd, to cancel all vouchers that have been issued, but tenants have not found units for.
Okay.
And that's part of that funding shortfall letter that we received. Other agencies across the country have received them.
The same.
Yes. We then went back to HUD and argued that we only had 4 vouchers that were out there. It's a very minimal number. In addition, we have an unusually high level of admin fee reserves that we've collected over the years by being extremely efficient. So to say that we will not have any money to help backfill any fiscal impact that might happen by allowing these vouchers to go out and continue to try and find a unit, when we back it up against a $5 million reserve and only 4 vouchers, it's a negligible amount. Please have some discretion to allow us. And in those cases, those 4 tenants had until May 10th before their voucher
That's
expired.
what I'm referring to, the May 10th date.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and so we said, here, you're asking May 2nd. We have 4 people that have until May 10th. Give them until May 10th. And that's what we struck with HUD.
Right. So, again, even when the HUD is sort of, making these pretty harsh demands off of our housing department, we're still trying to work with both them and our residents to make sure that their vouchers aren't lost. That was my question.
Right. We were given one answer of no, and we tried another area of HUD, and we got a yes, and we went with a yes. And we'll ask for forgiveness later.
Yep.
So, were there any applicants removed from the list for all of this period? Were there any applicant removed from the waiting list?
Yeah, there are people that were pulled from the waiting list that didn't qualify for a voucher. Maybe some had criminal records, and we said, we're sorry.
No, I'm not talking about the criminal. Let's say you're not finding them. No.
Yes, we've had
Yeah.
people who have been pulled from the waiting list that have been issued a voucher, that have gone out looking for a unit, have come back.
Okay.
They're allowed up to 6 months to be able to identify a unit maximum with reasons establishing why they need the full 6 months as opposed to the earlier deadlines, where they've come back and they've either said, I can't find a unit, I tried, here's the voucher back, or at the last minute, they might port out to another agency where they might be able to find a unit that they like.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you, Mr. Zovek,
thank
for
you.
a terrific report, very comprehensive, and I hope it helped everyone here and that's watching understand our affordable housing, our Section 8, or what are we calling it, the
Well, we
choice,
still
the
got
housing
the Section
choice.
8 program,
Yes,
correct.
Section
correct.
8.
And again, I do want to press upon the fact of what a smart and efficient staff that you all have that are all as sensitive as I am to your concerns about how the clients are treated in a fair and equitable manner, given all the restrictions that we have. So everyone, from the front counter staff to the advisors to the inspectors who deal with both tenants and owners, Mr. Rodarte, Ms. Bockenkamp, they all take that into consideration when they're dealing with the program.
Absolutely, and I've been here on council now for almost 3 years, and I compliment you and your staff on the work that you do, because I know that you try to be as fair as you can. You're welcome.
Thank you.
So this is a note and file?
Yes.
So do I need a motion for a note and file?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
And no vote necessary, correct?
You do.
You do. Okay.
Authority members Agajanian,
Yes.
Garpetian,
Yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Barazian,
Yes.
Sinanian,
Yes.
Chair Devine.
Yes. Next item, please.
Next item is motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
And we are adjourned at 5:25.
Okay.